Happy to. Hello, everyone, and I want to welcome all of you and thank you all for attending. It's great to have you. Before we get started, I just want to say I hope everyone is safe and dealing in the best way they can with these trying times. Let me just say that during these challenging times, there are things we can control and things we can't control. Those we can control, we have to do our best to handle in the most positive way we can muster. Those things we can control and affect in some way, we must do so. This series of webinars by Callagy Law, and there will be others on different subjects, is our way of trying to make life go on as normal. We hope that we'll be able to help you with your financial challenges and financial needs, and that's what these are about. If there are any other ways in which we can help other than trying to impart some sort of content that may help with the financial challenges you're all facing, please reach out to us. We would be happy to do so. This, as I said, is our way of trying to keep things as normal as we possibly can. And in this space, we can affect some things. And this is one of the areas we can all control, and that is our ability to help life go on in some sort of normal capacity. Having said that, let me just mention, if you have questions during the process, they are welcome. They are more than welcome before and after the webinar. If you are going to pose a question, please do so in the question and answer section, not in the chat section. Okay, that's the question and answer section, not in the chat section. With that, I'm going to introduce, let me just introduce both speakers. Michael Bittoni and David Quinones are the two attorneys that spearhead our New York PIP team. They have done a masterful job in the couple of years they've been with Callagy to turn New York PIP into a thriving line of business for Callagy. They both deserve a tremendous amount of credit for the growth that we have seen in our New York PIP line of business. So with that introduction, I will turn the microphone over to David Quinones.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you, Tom. Just like to introduce myself and talk a little bit about what I do here at Callagy. So I am the lead arbitration attorney. What I am is I'm on the front end of things, where Michael Bittoni is more on the back end, where his specialty lies more in the research and the writing and doing a lot of the hard work on the back end. I'm more on the front end, on the front lines, just battling away at arbitration, doing arguments, litigation in that sense. And so I like to think of us as a double-edged sword, where we equally fight this fight against the carriers and serve our clients to the best of our abilities. So that is a little bit about me and what I do here at Callagy. I will be happy to answer any questions regarding arbitration-specific issues and things that I can speak on that regard. But I will turn it over now to Michael, so you can do his introduction.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and thank you so much for what you all are doing. Those of you in the medical field are on the front lines of this crisis, and I hope that today will be valuable to you so that we can help you with your business during a time when a lot of patients are not coming in the door and businesses are facing difficult and sometimes catastrophic decisions driven by changes to revenue. A couple of disclaimers before we get started. While the topic of today's webinar is the New York fee schedule, it's important to understand that neither David nor I are certified coders, and our work is in arbitration, which means that we need to make legal arguments to get providers the best payment rate. Therefore, we are giving you information that you can give to your certified billing and coding professionals so that they can teach themselves the rest and make informed decisions about whether a claim has been paid properly. So let me say that again, we are not billing and coding professionals, but because we argue these issues every day in legal settings, we have learned enough information so that we can help your billing and coding professionals to get started teaching themselves how to use the New York fee schedule. There are basically no instructions about how to do this posted by New York State on the internet. So we've developed that internally, and that's what we're giving you today. This is for education only. It is not coding advice. It is not billing advice. It is not reimbursement advice. This is to help your billing and coding professionals get started on teaching themselves. That said, as far as I know, we at Callagy are the only people who know how to do this, and we are certainly the only people giving it away for free. We hope that this is something that's new for you and that can help you find potentially a backlog of recoverable claims that you might not even know are there. So I'm going to switch to a screen share now. Most of this presentation will be a screen share, and there is a lot of technical information. So if you haven't done that already, you need to have pen and paper, even better, pencil and paper, or a blank document on your computer up so that you can take notes on this process. So I will switch over to my screen share now. Okay, can everybody see my Microsoft Word document here, EAPG and New York DME introduction?
Yeah, we can see it, Mike.
Okay, great. The biggest challenge with the EAPG is just vocabulary. If you are a billing or coding professional or you work with someone who is, this is just a bundling methodology. This will be very familiar to you very quickly, but New York has posted no instructions, and it is filled with unique jargon and vocabulary that make it difficult to approach at first, but we will define the key terms for you, and once you understand the vocabulary, a lot of this will fall into place very quickly. Let's start with EAPG. What does this stand for? It stands for Enhanced Ambulatory Patient Group, and this is a key point, methodology. EAPG refers to a methodology. We also need to understand the term APG. Technically, this stands for Ambulatory Patient Group, but in practice, this is just a group of codes. In practice, when we use the term APG, we are talking about a group of codes. When you review APG, if you're familiar with the DRG system, you'll see that there's a lot of similarities between APG and DRG. The reason all the vocabulary is different is that New York just customized this to achieve whatever it wanted to do. A second challenge is that there are a bunch of different source documents that you need to be able to calculate EAPG reimbursement. And I'll introduce some of the key ones right now. And after this webinar, I will send out a link so that you can download all of these materials. By far, the most important is the EAPG Provider Manual. I'll show that to you briefly here. It looks like this. It's pretty good. Your homework, if you are handling facility bills or DME in New York, is to read this document in its entirety twice. If you are too busy, if things are too crazy right now, if you read the first 30 pages once, that will teach you most of what you need to know. But ideally, you're going to read this entire document twice. The next source material that we need to look at is a spreadsheet called the APG crosswalk table. And I'll explain what these documents are as we go. But first, let's make a list of them. Next, we need the APG rates table. Next, we need the APG consolidation table. And we need a list of modifiers in APG. Finally, and this will be a bonus part of this webinar, we will also discuss DME. 90% of the time that we are talking today, we'll be talking about EAPG. 10% will be for DME, because DME is just far less complicated. So let's do a really quick overview of what we're going to learn today. And I can actually teach you 80 or 90% of it in 2 minutes. There's a really easy question in EAPG, and then there's a really difficult question. The easy question, how do I know if I've been underpaid? You can probably find the majority of your underpayments using just a couple of small, quick tools. So your first tool, and this is anecdotal. This isn't necessarily going to apply to everybody, but we represent a wide variety of outpatient facilities, including hospital outpatient centers and ambulatory surgery centers. So we see a high volume of these claims, and this is based on our experience. But it's possible that you as an individual business might have a different experience. But probably the biggest reason for EAPG underpayments is wrongful bundling of modifier 59 codes. Number two, actually we'll throw in modifier 50 and anatomical modifiers. If you see a line item with 59, 50, or left-right modifiers that's been zeroed out, that is a red flag, not an absolute indication, but a red flag that you've been underpaid. Number two, and this is going to get into the substance of APG, so we'll explain how to figure this out in a little bit, and by the end of today's lesson, you should understand it. You could have wrongful bundling of unrelated APGs. And remember, when we say the term APG, that just refers to a group of codes. And finally, we have wrongful bundling of DME. Wrongful bundling of DME is a huge issue, huge issue. EAPG is complicated, and carriers understand that many providers don't know how it works. They wrongly bundle codes all the time, and we deal with a high volume of these cases. So if you see a DME code and there is no payment on that, but you have a purchase order and you can prove that you paid for it, that is going to be another red flag that you've been underpaid. So let's talk about our specific outcomes for going over our introduction to EAPG. By the end of today's webinar, you should understand general EAPG principles. You should be able to talk about EAPG concepts, and we will also calculate one hypothetical EAPG bill. So I already discussed some of the difference between what a certified coder does and what David and I do. So we've already gone through this. And now let's actually get into the substance of EAPG. I see a question from Jessica. Are you considering DME as implantable devices in the outpatient ASC space? Yes. Actually, surgical implants are anecdotally the most common reason we see for incorrect bundling of DME codes. We see this a lot on L codes and C codes. And when we get to the hypothetical bill that I've put together for you, you'll see that we have L codes and C codes on there that are spinal implants. And by the way, feel free to ask questions at any time. The best way to do that is using the question and answer box on Zoom, but we are keeping an eye on chat. You're welcome, Jessica. Okay, so I'm going to pull up my sample bill for you, and there's a lot here. But once you get really good at this, you'll understand everything that you're looking at immediately, and it will only take you 10 minutes to do this. So let's break this down so that it's not just wall O numbers and text, so that we understand the components of what's going on here. When you are trying to figure out the correct payment rate for an outpatient facility bill subject to the New York fee schedule, the first thing you need to do is transfer your CPT codes from your bill into a spreadsheet, and you're going to need to work in a spreadsheet. I don't have an actual bill here, and I have no idea if any of these codes would ever occur together. This is just an example to show you how the reimbursement works. But so step number one, take all of your CPT codes and transfer them into a spreadsheet. I like to do that by putting the codes in one column and the modifiers in another column. And the reason for that is codes and modifiers give you different information about how each line item will be paid. Okay, so I just got a question to increase the size on Word and Excel so that it's easier to see. How is this? Better? Okay, if you want me to make anything else bigger, just let me know as we go. So first, put all of your CPT codes onto your spreadsheet. Step number two, look up your APG for each CPT code. What does that mean? Remember that APG is just New York's jargon for a group of codes. So step one, after we put our CPT codes onto the spreadsheet, is to find out what the number of each codes group is. And we do that using a document that New York published called the APG crosswalk table. This is really simple. Again, one of the big challenges is vocabulary. But what are we doing here? We're just looking up a code and finding out a group that it belongs to. So let's start with the first code on this bill here, 29827. I need to pull up the APG crosswalk table and find out what APG, again, that means what group of codes 29827 belongs to. So I'll just scroll all the way down. And when you download the crosswalk table, you'll see the codes are organized on the left. Then you have a description of the codes. And then you have the EAPG number, or the APG number that it belongs to. There's a bunch of other information in here. Really, you don't need to worry about that. And as we go through APG, understand that the material we're looking at today is just a small percentage, and it's just the introductory stuff. EAPG is a vast methodology, and it's possible that you may need many more documents and much more information that we're going to cover today. And I have a question from Jessica. How often does New York publish APGs? There isn't really any predictable change frequency. There's an email address that you can contact to subscribe to be notified of changes, and I will circulate that information after this webinar. I will say in the past 2 to 3 years, I think we've seen 3 or 4 updates. But some of those updates came one after another. There was a period where they updated every 3 months or so. And that can be a little bit frustrating. But as long as you're subscribed to the email address, you will be notified of any updates.
Michael, we also have a question. Is there a New York PIP fee schedule compared to the one in the state of New Jersey?
Yes. New York actually has 4 different fee schedules for no fault. EAPG, Enhanced Ambulatory Patient Group Methodology, is the outpatient facility fee schedule. There is also a medical fee schedule for bills by doctors and other treating individuals. There's an inpatient fee schedule for facilities, and then there's a DME fee schedule. Today we'll be talking about the outpatient facility fee schedule. We do have trainings on all other fee schedules except inpatient. And if you're interested in those, let me know after the webinar, and we'd be happy to set up a session for you. Okay, so where are we on calculating our first line item? First, we put, let's recap, we put our CPT code and our modifiers on our spreadsheet. Then we need to figure out what APG that code belongs to. Again, lots of jargon. We are just looking up numbers in a table, that's it. So I'm looking for 29827, so I'm gonna scroll. And here's 298. Here's 29827, and I see that it belongs to EAPG 38. Okay, so I write APG 38 in my APG column. Next, I need to figure out what kind of APG I'm talking about. What kind of code group is this? In EAPG methodology, there are three different, well, there's a few more than that, but there's three primary kinds of APGs. So we have significant procedures, we have ancillary procedures. Well, actually we have, let's be more accurate, we have significant procedure APGs, we have ancillary APGs, and we have incidental APGs. We don't need to go too deeply into the difference among these. Essentially, when you're dealing with a facility bill, you're probably going to be getting paid on your significant procedure APGs, and then your ancillary and incidental APGs. I'm actually going to put these on one line. These will usually be bundled. A significant procedure APG, essentially that's going to be something like a surgical procedure, and an ancillary or incidental APG will often be something like an X-ray, possibly some kind of imaging guidance, depending on the code. That is typically performed as part of the significant procedure, and because significant procedure rates are calculated anticipating that they'll be performed with routine ancillary services, the significant procedure itself includes the cost for those ancillary and incidental APGs. Therefore, that's why significant procedure APGs are usually going to get paid, with some exceptions, while ancillary and incidental APGs are usually going to get bundled, also with some exceptions. So what have we done now? We have our CPT code, we have our modifier, we wrote down the APG number, and we recorded the type of APG that this is. In this case, this is a surgical procedure code for a right shoulder arthroscopy. It's a significant procedure. All right. Then we repeat that exercise for all of our other codes using the crosswalk table. So essentially, right here, this whole part of the table, this is basically step 1 and 2. Step 1, we have put our CPT codes on the table. And then step 2 is put the APG number and the APG type next to that. Step 3, we record the APG weight. And there's another spreadsheet for that. It's called APG weights. To use the APG weights table, and again, there's tons and tons and tons of information in here. We'll only look at a small portion of it, but just be aware that there's lots of stuff here. So depending on your specific business, there could be other stuff that you need to look at. And there's 3 different tabs here. I'm just going to be going over the first one with you to show you the basics. But let me make this bigger. Once you know the number of the APG, then you look up that number APG in the weights table, and then you put the APG weight into your spreadsheet. So my first code here is APG 38. So I'm going to look up APG 38 in my weights table. And here we go. Note that the weights table is organized by date. And note also that everything that's visible on the screen here, it's staying the same over time. There is a small number of APGs where the weight changes. And usually that happens when codes are shifted between APGs or APGs are redefined in some way. But in most instances, the APG weight stays the same for most APGs over time. So our data services today, so I'm looking up the weight for APG 38 for the correct time period. So I'm looking at 2020 and I see that my APG weight, I usually go down to 2 decimal places. The APG weights are, you can see up here. I don't know why they go into the, I don't even know what this is. I don't even know the word for that, how many decimal places that is. That's really not necessary. When we're talking about fractions of a penny at that point, I usually just go down 2 decimal places. So I copy my APG weight into here. Now, the next step is really easy. We have to add our base rate. And there may be some exceptions to this, but for almost all downstate New York and New Jersey providers, your base rate is, sorry, there's a small mistake here. For almost all New Jersey and downstate New York providers, your base rate is going to be $295.94. I'll say that again. For almost all downstate New York and New Jersey providers, your base rate is going to be $295.94. There are some exceptions. There are different base rates for upstate New York facilities, and there are special fee schedules that apply to specific providers, which are published on the Workers' Comp Board website. If you think that might apply to you, reach out to me after the webinar, and we can try to figure out what your base rate would be. But probably, I'm thinking everybody on this webinar is probably going to have a base rate of $295.94. Finally, figure out what packaging, bundling, or discounting will apply to your line item. And we'll talk about how to do that in a minute. And at this point, essentially, how do you calculate a line item? You multiply these 3 numbers together. So it's simple arithmetic. You multiply your APG weight times your base rate times packaging, bundling, and discounting, if any. Actually, this one's going to be 50. Okay. So what's our capital add-on, and how do we figure out packaging, bundling, and discounting? This is essentially, this is 80% of APG. This is 80% of what makes it complicated. This requires some explanation, but essentially you're just looking stuff up in spreadsheets here. This I found out by looking up my code in a spreadsheet. This, I looked it up in a spreadsheet. My weight, I look it up in a spreadsheet. My base rate is going to be the same basically all the time, no matter what. Here's what changes all the time. And here's the complexity of the EAPG. What is a capital add-on? This is an amount for older dates of service. It's going to be $81.37 added to your highest weighted line item on every medical visit. Let me say that again. What is a capital add-on? It is a certain amount. For older bills, the amount is $81.37 added to the highest weighted line item on your bill. It's a little bit of free money that you get. Why is it there? It's there because New York decided it's going to be there. There just are not answers to many of the aspects of EAPG. There's no information about why it's there. We just know that it is. So this is another easy part. You add this amount to your highest weighted line item, and that's it. So as you can see, we've just covered almost everything on this entire spreadsheet. So we've covered rows A through H. We've covered excuse me, columns A through H, we've covered K. Now we just have to deal with packaging, bundling, and discounting. And again, if you're familiar with bundling methodologies, this isn't going to be too bad. Okay, so let's go back to something we talked about before. The difference between significant procedure APGs and ancillary and incidental APGs. Significant procedure APGs will usually get paid, and ancillary and incidental APGs will usually get bundled.
Hey, Mike, could I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah, what's up,
As
David?
we were doing the calculation, I know this comes up a lot in arbitration, but certainly the anatomical modifier prevents bundling. And
Yep.
so the 59 modifier, which signifies a separate procedure, when are those appropriate? When is a 59 modifier able to be used by the provider to prevent that bundling so that there's at least 50% reimbursement for those codes?
David, these are great questions. And we'll go into the details of some of that as we talk about packaging, bundling, and discounting, because modifiers, and it's really important to understand this in general and for this bill specifically, modifiers can drastically change the reimbursement rate on a bill. And one of the, in our little cheat sheet for quick ways to know that you've been underpaid, ignoring modifiers is a chief way to know that you may have been underpaid. So David, your question, how do we know when it's appropriate to use these modifiers? There's two answers to that. The first is we can't give you any billing or coding advice. You need to get that from your billing and coding professionals. But assuming that the modifiers are used correctly, if you see that these were not paid, if there's one of these modifiers on here and it was not paid, that is a red flag that you have been underpaid. So let's look at our example here. We have modifier 59 on 20680, removal of implant. If this code on the insurance company's EOB were 0, that would be a red flag about an underpayment. We see here that we have two different, actually, let me change this a little bit. Okay, we see here that we have two identical codes with anatomical modifiers. If you saw on an EOB that this one were that your right code were paid, but your left code was bundled, that would be a red flag that you've been underpaid. And we'll talk about why that is in a few minutes, or actually we can go over it right now. One of the source documents that we talked about, so we've got our list of major source documents here, right? One of the major source documents is our list of modifiers in APG. This is another spreadsheet, and it talks about how modifiers are used in APG. They drastically alter bundling. There are many modifiers with specific descriptions about how they affect reimbursement. The major ones that we see for arbitration purposes are modifier 59. Generally speaking, codes that have 59 properly applied will discount to 50% rather than getting bundled down to 0. Right-left modifiers, similarly, if the second code is not paid, is shown as bundled, that is likely not correct. Note that the anatomical modifiers are actually not in this document. We reached out to 3M directly. 3M is the company that maintains EAPG methodology on behalf of New York State. And they sent us a document that explains that left-right modifiers override bundling in a way that's similar to modifier 59 and similar to modifier 50. There's also support for this in other APG documents, which I'm not going to get into at this point, but I will provide information to you about how you can request these additional documents. But if you're using, you need to be familiar with modifiers when you're figuring out what you should be paid. And this is an important chart. Okay, so when we're figuring out packaging, bundling, and discounting, we'll talk about the general rules, then we'll talk about the exceptions and how those exceptions affect reimbursement. So here's a couple of major general rules. Okay, significant procedure APGs. The highest weighted significant procedure APG will be paid at 100%. So there's no bundling, there's no discounting. Related significant procedure APGs are consolidated. And consolidated is the EAPG specific term for bundling. Essentially, it's a synonym for bundling. And third, unrelated APGs that are lower, that have lower weights are discounted, usually to 50%. There is an entire spreadsheet of APGs that have discounting rates other than 50%, which I will send to everybody. And we need our list of APG discount rates. But the vast majority of APGs, when they discount to 50%. Okay, so let's go over that again. Our highest weighted significant procedure APG is paid at 100%. Related significant procedure APGs are consolidated or bundled, and unrelated significant procedure APGs with a lower weight are discounted usually to 50%. How do we know if an APG is bundled or if it discounts? Well, there's a spreadsheet for that. And I will send you a link to this file after the webinar. This is what it looks like. Basically, you start with the you start with your first APG, and you see if any other APGs are bundled underneath it. And you have to go down your entire bill with this table. So, all right, I'm starting with APG 38. I'm going to go all the way down to APG 38 and see if any of my other APGs on here are bundled under 38. So let's see. I have APG 37. Oh, I see. You probably need this to be bigger. I see that APG 37 is bundled under 38. So the general rule is because 38 is consolidated under APG, excuse me, because APG 37 is consolidated under APG 38, okay, I'm not gonna get paid for 37. The reason for that is higher weighted APGs include the payment for lower weighted APGs that consolidate under them. So you are getting paid for APG 37, but it is included in the payment for APG 38. I also have APG 36 on here, but I don't see that under here. So that suggests that APG 36 is going to get discounted, not bundled. But in order to be sure, I need to scroll up to APG 36. Okay, here's APG 36. I do not see 38. I do not see 37, but I do see 10. Okay, so I've just confirmed that APG 36 is going to discount rather than bundle. And I've confirmed that APG 10 is also going to bundle rather than discount. So at this point, I found out that APG 38 is going to get paid, and all of these other all of these other APGs, these are going to bundle. And that's before considering modifiers. So let's say we had no modifiers at all. I'm going to hide the modifier column right now. And not including the implants, just the procedure codes here with no modifiers at all. The first one would get paid. All of the others would bundle. And my payment rate, not including DME, would be this. How did I get that number? I multiply my APG weight times my base rate times my packaging bundling discounting rate is 100%. I add my capital add-on because this is my highest weighted APG. And then I get my line rate. Now, if I had an unrelated APG on here, I'm gonna, it doesn't really matter. Let's say we have code 12345. Let's say code 12345 is in, I'm just picking numbers randomly here, is in APG 45. Let's say it's a significant procedure. Let's say it has a weight of 5. And let's say that hypothetically APG 45 is not consolidated under APG 38. That means APG 45 would get discounted. And the reason is it's a non-consolidated or unrelated APG. I have no capital modifier. I have no capital add-on on here because remember the capital add-on only gets added to the highest weighted APG. And then I just multiply my weight times my base rate times bundling. And I get an extra $740 on there. Okay, now let's talk about, let's review ancillary and incidental procedures. Ancillary and incidental procedures only get paid if they are not on the same bill as a significant procedure or if they have a modifier. Only, actually, let's say if on the same bill as a significant procedure APG, they are bundled. If not on the same bill as a significant procedure APG, then follow the rules above. Basically, your highest weighted codes will get paid, and then related APGs will be consolidated. Unrelated APGs will be discounted, but I will say anecdotally, for facility bills, it's quite rare to have ancillary and incidental APGs not on the same bill as a significant procedure. If you have a bill like that, or if that's a common practice for your business, reach out to me and we can talk about some of the unique rules that apply in this situation. But the majority of facilities that are doing outpatient care, you're going to be dealing with a significant procedure bill that might have ancillary and incidental APGs. All right, now our major exception, modifiers. We already talked about this a little bit. Basically, modifier 59 is going to lead to discounting, usually 50%. Left, right will lead to the first code will get paid based on the general rules. The second code should get discounted. And modifier 50, this is the standard 150% rate. Depending on whether you have 1 or 2 line items, you can adjust accordingly. But if this is 0, that should be a red flag for you. And I have a question from Lisa. Can you explain what bundling means in general? Sure. Bundling is a catch-all term. And when we're talking about EAPG methodology, consolidation and bundling are synonyms. Remember, one of the big challenges with EAPG isn't that it's really complicated. It's just basic arithmetic It's that there's so much vocabulary that we have to learn. It's a little bit like learning a new language, even if you're used to other methodologies that bundle codes. So let's talk about APG 38 and APG 37. Many more complicated shoulder arthroscopies involve a decompression of the source of the pain. So because a more intensive procedure is almost always going to include a less intensive procedure, the more intensive procedure is going to include the payment for the less intensive procedure, and then the less intensive procedure will not be paid on its own. It'll be bundled into the more intensive procedure. So let's try to draw an analogy. If I buy a T-shirt, I'm not paying money separately for cotton and thread. I'm paying one rate for the entire T-shirt, which includes many different components. Essentially, bundling works the same way. When a procedure is billed that predictably includes many different components, EAPG pays an average rate. Now, one T-shirt that is really complicated might have more components than another T-shirt that is less complicated. But a store could choose to offer both of those T-shirts at the same rate because it's easier and more efficient to have a uniform price for similar products than it is to have a different price for products that aren't really that different. EAPG ultimately is an averaging methodology. So two different patients who receive different treatment could often get the same reimbursement rate if their procedures belong to the same code groups. So let's say I have one patient who receives procedures A, B, and C, and I have a second patient who receives only procedure A. If procedures A, B, and C all belong to the same APG, if they all belong to the same group of codes, then patient 1 and patient 2 will get paid at the same rate. The reason is, even though there are different reportable codes at issue, they've essentially received very similar treatment that for purposes of resource intensiveness on a facility are very similar. Therefore, even though there are some differences between these patients, the facility will get paid the same rate. If you have more questions about what bundling means in general, let me know. Feel free to interrupt. Okay.
Michael, I'd like to interject a question.
Sure.
The 5-1 modifier, some providers, probably more surgeons than facilities, use the 5-1 modifier in ways that are relatively similar to the 5-9 modifier. Is the 5-1 treated the same way as the 5-9?
So the answer to any EAPG question is we need to look up the relevant document. And if you look on here, this document does not actually include the 51 modifier.
Okay.
So if anybody on this webinar has a bill or regularly deals with the 51 modifier, email me afterwards and we can talk about how that affects your specific business. And Tom, that's actually a great question, not just because it's something that some providers do, but also it highlights one of the recurring problems with EAPG. And that problem is EAPG often does not give you the answer to what you're supposed to do. And let me say that again. EAPG, even though it's a highly customized proprietary payment methodology adopted by New York State, it often doesn't tell you what to do. When that happens, if you look through your EAPG materials and you find that the answer is not clear, that's going to be another red flag that insurance companies will take that lack of clarity as an opportunity to pay you less than what you could be entitled to. So when you start reviewing your EAPG materials after this webinar, if you find that you don't have any information about what to do in a specific circumstance, let's talk about it, because that's exactly, in addition to the issues that we already talked about, like ignoring modifiers or wrongly bundling unrelated APGs, taking advantage of vague parts of EAPG is another red flag area for getting potentially underpaid. When that happens, it does generate a high rate of arbitrations, and that's something that we can work with you on individually so that you can figure out where these kinds of issues exist and have a plan to deal with them in advance. In some cases, having documentation above and beyond just sending in a bill and op report can protect your right to getting paid, or it can protect your ability to recover additional payments that might be unclear based on published EAPG materials. But that's a gray area, and it needs to be individually tailored, so there's not a whole lot I can say about that right now. If you're dealing with that, or if you're dealing with something that is not an EAPG, it's not because you don't understand. That's actually very common. EAPG just doesn't give you the answer a lot of the time.
Got it, thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm just having a tech issue. Let me see if I can get Zoom off the screen here. Okay, so right here, you're discounting packaging and bundling. This is the majority of what you need to understand to fill out this column. So now let's look at a couple of different hypotheticals for this bill, and let's see how modifiers can affect bundling. One of the things that we mentioned is the difference between right and left. So in this case, let's look at just these two codes individually. We have right-left modifiers. We know, and if we have only these two procedure codes on here, our highest weighted one is going to get paid at 100, and then this one would normally be bundled, but because we have an anatomical modifier here, it should get discounted. This code, it's in APG 10. We already found that APG 10 is bundled with APG 38, but because modifier 59 is here, it's going to discount instead. And actually, this is let me correct some of the data on here. Okay, if we have modifier 59 on here, we'll have a similar result. Okay, that basically covers it for our brief introduction to dealing with procedure codes under EAPG. I'd like to invite questions or comments before we move on to DME, which will only take a few minutes. Okay, I don't see any questions, but feel free to chime in at any time. Now we will move on to DME. So New York does have a DME fee schedule, and as I mentioned, one of the, oh, it looks like we have a question. Right, what does EAPG stand for? Let's go back to our vocabulary. EAPG refers to a methodology. So Enhanced Ambulatory Patient Group methodology refers to the fee schedule overall. EAPG is a methodology for paying outpatient facilities in New York. But when we talk about an APG as a unit, we're referring to a group of codes. APG stands for Ambulatory Patient Group. It's a bunch of jargon. The key word here is group. Group. It's just a group of codes. That's it. Codes are placed into groups, and then the entire group is paid at the same average rate. So if I have a group of codes that has 20 different codes in it, if I have all 20 of those codes on my bill, and there's no modifiers, and all of those codes are in the same group, only the first code gets paid, and the last 19 will get bundled. If I have one code from that same APG, that code will get paid, and those two different bills will get the same rate, even though one bill has one code and the second bill has 20 codes. It's just a group of codes. DME. DME has its own fee schedule. Your typical reason for a denial on a facility bill is an insurance carrier will say that DME is an ancillary or incidental APG that gets bundled when it's on the same bill as a significant procedure. Now, that is a sophistry. That is absolutely meritless, but it's an example of an insurance carrier taking advantage of some of the complexity in the fee schedule that New York adopted to underpay providers, oftentimes without providers even knowing. So if you look up L codes, many L codes and C codes, which is where we see this a lot, you'll see that they actually are listed as ancillary and incidental APGs. So, okay, if you look only at the APG materials, you might think, oh, wow, geez, I have a $5,000 procedure code, and then I have $4,000 worth of implants that I purchased. That almost wipes out my payment for the entire procedure. Geez, that's nuts. And again, the argument that DME is bundled, this is a sophistry. With L codes and C codes, there's a couple things going on here at once. First, a lot of these are not in the DME fee schedule. Let me say that again. Many L codes and C codes, and honestly lots of other codes too, many DME codes are not in the DME fee schedule. They're listed in the EAPG materials, but they're not in the DME fee schedule. So you look at the APG materials, it says ancillary, incidental, and you think, and then you don't see them in the DME materials, and you think, wow, geez, this is pretty rough. I have $4,000 in implants on my $5,500 facility bill. Geez, it's pretty tough to make any revenue on this. That's actually not true. There's a totally separate regulation that deals specifically with this circumstance. If your code is not listed in the DME fee schedule, if your code is not listed in the DME fee schedule, and you have a purchase order showing that you bought it, in most instances, that DME is going to be separately payable. Why is this? The reason is that if you can show that you purchased the DME, then you're getting reimbursed for DME because it's DME. And now, in some instances, a facility will bill for a DME, and in other instances, DME suppliers will bill for it. If both of those providers bill, then obviously only one of them will get paid. And in some instances, New York actually asks for facilities to include items for which it's not seeking reimbursement on the bill, essentially just for statistical and tracking purposes. But that's really getting into the weeds there. The bottom line is these codes that are not listed in the DME fee schedule, even if they're in EAPG as incidental or ancillaries, are usually going to be separately payable.
Michael?
Yep.
Michael, a quick question. Is the reimbursement level a percentage of the implant invoice amount, or is it UCR?
That's a great question, Tom. And the regulation is a little bit complicated on that. And I would like to invite everybody to contact me after the webinar so that we can give you specific information. that applies to your business? The general answer is that payment is at 150% of the wholesale or manufacturer cost. Let me say that again. Payment is at 150% of the wholesale or manufacturer cost. So let's talk about what that means. If you know that the wholesale or manufacturer cost, let me start a new spreadsheet here. If you know that a DME costs $100 wholesale, that means that as long as it's a DME that falls into this category, the payment rate is going to be $150. The reason is it's paid at 150% of the manufacturing or wholesale cost. Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I will zoom in to make this bigger. So but again, in many instances, you're only entitled to whatever you put in your bill. So if your build rate is $100, you're gonna end up getting underpaid. By understanding the law with respect to DME not listed in the DME fee schedule, you can bill appropriately so that you get everything that you're entitled to. If you bill too low, you're often going to be capped at what's on your bill. If you bill too high, let's say you bill $300 for this, the reimbursement rate can get reduced, but you still should be entitled to 150% of the wholesale or manufacturing cost. Now, if you're a facility and you acquired your DME from a retail supplier, you need to make sure that you have a copy of the wholesale or manufacturing invoice, because that's the basis for reimbursement. If you have only the retail invoice, that's going to cause a lot of problems for you.
Hey, Michael, can we make the Excel tab a little bit bigger?
Yep.
Thank you.
How's that? Okay.
Yeah, that looks good.
Great. Now, there's a bunch of DME that are listed on the fee schedule, and I think I'm actually going to end my screen share here. There's a bunch of DME that actually are listed in the fee schedule, and that's pretty simple. You just look up your DME in your spreadsheet, and that's going to tell you if you get paid. Because of the wide variety of DME, there are some DME that, in fact, are bundled. But if you have questions about this, please contact me after the webinar so that we can give you guidance about whether the DME you're using is something that will be bundled, something that's payable at the fee schedule rate, or something that's payable at the manufacturer or wholesale rate times 150%. Okay, that is our introduction to APG and DME and the New York fee schedule. It's a lot of material. This webinar is being recorded, so if you want to watch it again, we can set you up with that, and be on the lookout for an email so that you can have links to download all of the source materials that we used. I know this is really technical. Thank you so much for attending and for your attention. The benefit of learning all of this stuff, like we said in the beginning, we are going through a crisis that for many of us is unprecedented in our lifetimes. It's affecting our businesses. And because of the high rate of underpayments of APG bills and DME, many providers are sitting on a recoverable backlog of claims, and you might not even know it. And going forward, for bills that you have coming in, it's important for you to understand that first, that there's a high rate of underpayments, and second, to be able to find them and recover them when they happen. All right, that's it, everybody.
Let me interject one last thing. Everybody out there, to the extent there is some information here you were not previously aware of, keep in mind New York PIP has a 6-year statute of limitations, 6 years. So it's very possible that if you weren't aware of some of the things Michael discussed, you may have a significant backlog of claims that have potential for additional recovery. So 6 years worth is out there. So if you identify some areas that you might have missed along the way, go back 6 years because there's a 6-year statute.
I just had one comment regarding the DMEs. It's extremely crucial for providers to not only bill correctly, but also have the invoices and all the substantiating documentation so that when we do arrive at an arbitration hearing, we are in the best possible position to argue for the appropriate reimbursement based on those wholesale invoices as Michael described, and just all the proper documentation in regard to the EAPG and the facility bills. Also the same reasoning that all the billing and the modifiers and all the documentation just has to be as succinct and clear as possible on the arbitration front, so that we can, fight the best fight that we can. It becomes very adversarial and litigious, especially with DMEs regarding proper invoice rates, and certainly the distinction between retail and wholesale invoice has been a very hot button issue, but the correct reimbursement is the wholesale invoice. So it can cause a lot of problems, as Michael said, when all we have in our position is the retail invoice. So just wanted to reinforce that in terms of understanding how to go about billing and providing the necessary documentation.
Okay, everybody, I posted my email address as well as David and Tom's email addresses. Please be on the lookout for an email from us later today with links to the source documents. Please reach out to us if you have questions. This is a major issue. It's also complicated, but the benefit of learning it is, let me put it this way. Out of all the outpatient facilities we deal with,
I think there's a question, Mike.
Sure. Out of all the outpatient facilities we deal with, I haven't found one that didn't have underpayments.
There's a question here. Michael, you could read it, but I could definitely give an answer to this, and that would be, there's certainly a reasonableness. So the question for those that haven't reviewed it, will the carriers forgive the 45 timely rule for providers during the coronavirus? Certainly reasonableness is the argument to make here. However, I will stress that some communication must be made to carriers, even if there is some hardship, something preventing timely billing. There just has to be something submitted to the carrier to put them on notice that there's hardship, so that they can't then refute the argument of reasonableness later on. It will preserve that argument. Michael,
let me add something to that, David. You're absolutely right, David. That is a very important precaution. Let me just say, we, of course, in all areas where the timeliness argument is going to be made by carriers and the provider's ability to be timely was impacted by what is happening today during the crisis, we will certainly be making the arguments that, given the circumstances, the timeliness argument should be something that the courts and the arbitrators do not permit to go forward. It's hard to say how decision makers will react to that argument, but it is certainly an argument that will be made, and my guess is different decision makers will be deciding differently. I think some will be very sympathetic, and I think some others will say, well, some action could have been taken. So we don't really know how it's going to play out specifically, but we certainly will be fighting the fight.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I want to add to what David and Tom said. To protect your right to payment, if the crisis is going to create problems for you getting your bill in on time, it's critical to be proactive. David and Tom just mentioned communicating with the carrier about this. There are specific legal standards that need to be met. So if you know in advance that this is going to cause issues for you getting your bill in on time, reach out to us so that we can put a plan in place that is going to satisfy those legal standards. As long as you meet them, even if a carrier won't pay you, you can still get the claim recovered if those standards are met. This is something that you need to do in advance to have the maximum opportunity, the maximum chance of recovering your claim.
Do we have any other questions?
Okay, well, thank you all for participating. Please reach out with any other questions you might have about the content or questions about anything at all. So we are here, we are available, we are always willing to assist. And again, thank everybody for their participation. Michael and David, thank you guys. Krista, who has been our in the studio, behind the scenes maven, making all this happen. Thank you so much. And Mark, thank you as well. So everybody have a great day. Please be safe, and we will get through this, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Oh, wait.
Thank you all.
Oh, never mind.
Bye, guys.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in.